Cold War or Asymmetric Warfare by Olavo de Carvalho, published in Folha de São Paulo, July 27, 2014. In Brazil, the popular notion of the Cold War remains unquestioned, a cunning, relentless struggle between two superpowers consumed by hatred. However, today, this cliché can be tossed into the dustbin of history as an outdated fairy tale, a narrative designed to offer lazy minds the illusion that they understood what was really happening. Over the past few decades, countless facts have emerged thanks to the decoding of the Venona files, communications between the Soviet embassy in Washington and Moscow, and a wealth of documents unearthed from Soviet archives. As a result, almost nothing remains of the once dominant worldview of the Cold War was peddled by the media and academic elites. The truth is, during that period, primary occupation of the Soviet government and media was to lie about the United States. Meanwhile, their American counterparts were equally dedicated to lying on behalf of the USSR. But it wasn't just about lying. They also concealed Soviet crimes, protected their agents, and advanced the USSR's interests over those of friendly nations, and even at times, over the interests of their own country. What we see today, instead of the balance of power often depicted in mainstream media or Wikipedia as the accurate historical portrait, is what later came to be known as asymmetric warfare, where one side actively fights its opponent while the other side undermines it. Now, don't misunderstand me. There was certainly a strong and determined anti-communism in America, ready to do whatever was necessary to halt the Soviet advance in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Many figures stood out in this fight: journalists, writers, artists, politicians, military leaders, and intelligence agents. Their efforts were colossal, and it's from these that any legitimate view of the US as the foremost enemy of communism is derived. Just consider names like George S. Patton, Douglas MacArthur, Robert Taft, Whittaker Chambers, Joseph McCarthy, Eugene Lyons, Sidney Hook, Fulton Sheen, Edgar J. Hoover, James Jesus Angleton, Robert Conquest, and Barry Goldwater, to grasp why anti-communism became such a quintessential image of America both domestically and abroad. However, upon examining these cases individually, it becomes clear that the driving force was personal initiative rather than government policy. Almost without exception, those who distinguished themselves in this struggle were thwarted, restrained by Washington's authorities, even when they themselves were part of the government, and vilified by the media, academia, and show business, either during their lives or posthumously. They were often sabotaged and persecuted by their own Republican and conservative peers, who feared appearing more anti-communist than the fashionable anti-communism allowed. In summary, while American society was brimming with anti-communism, the official policy, since Roosevelt, the notable exception of Ronald Reagan's administration, was systematically one of poorly disguised collaboration. The explanation for this lies in the fact that Soviet agents infiltrated the US government and major media in numbers far exceeding the 50-some individuals Joe McCarthy had identified, a modest estimate for which he paid the price of becoming the most hated senator in American history. Today, we know there were over 1,000, many of them in high-ranking positions, where they didn't just influence but actually determine the course of US foreign policy, always, of course, in favor of the USSR. The most classic example of this was the deterioration of US-Japan relations, which culminated in the attack on Pearl Harbor, a brilliant plan devised in Moscow to free the Soviet Union from the threat of a two-front war by skillfully manipulating Japanese fury against the American. This was orchestrated through the Red Orchestra led by Richard Sorge in Tokyo and President Roosevelt's advisor, Harry Hopkins, in Washington. But the chapters of this collaborative saga pile up in staggering numbers, right up to the Clinton administration, when government encouragement of massive investments in China transformed a bankrupt nation into a threatening enemy power. I don't believe this story, arguably the best documented one of the 20th century, has ever been told in Brazil. Even in the United States, it circulates only among intellectuals and professional historians, while the general public continues to follow the official legend. It's a story too vast and complex for me to summarize here. What I can do is recommend a few books that will provide the reader with an understanding of the current state of research on this topic. Diana West, American Betrayal, Secret Assault on Our Nation's Character, Nate Martins, 2013. Herbert Romerstein and Eric Brindle, The Venona Secrets, Exposing Soviet Espionage and America's Traitors, Regnery, 2000. John Earl Haynes and Harvey Clare, Venona, Decoding Soviet Espionage in America, Yale University Press, 1999. Alan Weinstein and Alexander Vasiliev, The Haunted Wood, Soviet Espionage in America, The Stalin Era, Random House, 1999. Paul Kengor, Dupes, How America's Adversaries Have Manipulated Progressives for a Century, ISA Books, 2010. Arthur Herman, Joseph McCarthy, Re-Examining the Life and Legacy of America's Most Hated Senator, Free Press, 2000. M. Stanton Evans, Blacklisted by History, The Untold Story of Senator Joe McCarthy, Brown Forum, 2007. Robert K. Wilcox, Target Patton, The Plot to Assassinate General George S. Patton, Regnery, 2008.